I'll start with an acknowledgement of country, and just like to say MPAQ and us here, we acknowledge the Jagera and Turrbal people as the traditional custodians of Meanjin, the lands on which our office is located and where we meet today, where we meet, learn and work. Also, I'd like to say we, MPAQ, we admire and respect the oldest living culture on Earth, and we're committed to strengthening our understanding of Aboriginal history, culture and perspectives. Right, so, wow. Today we have our 25th Romeo Lahey Lecture, 25. And it started over half a century ago, the Romeo Lahey Lecture. So it's quite an extraordinary history. And I know many of you in this room would know who Romeo Lahey was, but very, very quickly. Romeo Lahey initially formed MPAQ in 1930, so that's 96 years ago. And he did a lot of work putting together a proposal to the government to protect Lamington as a national park, which was accepted in 1915. So it was his work that got Lamington National Park, together with Arthur Groom, who worked with him, approved. And he kept on going till in his 70s. And he did work putting together proposals as well as ground truthing, research work for both the Daintree and Mosman Gorge areas as well, and put proposals to the government, and they were both accepted and protected as national parks. So he's had quite a significant history in the protection of natural areas across Queensland, going on for decades. So it's an amazing story. Just today I'd like to acknowledge Tony Groom here, who's the son of Arthur Groom, and yeah. And we're also expecting David Drake, who's Romeo Lahey's grandson, but he might be here a little bit later. All right, I'd like to introduce now Professor James Watson. James is the Professor of Conservation Science at the University of Queensland. You may have read part of his biography or part of his on the website. But I initially heard James about a bit over a year ago giving a talk that was actually at the Oronga Community Centre, and it was about environmental issues of protected areas and so on. And I thought, he's very good. He was actually very clear, a lot of expertise and knowledge and data to back up his talk, and communicated very well. It's very thought-provoking too. And I thought, he'd be really good giving a Romeo Lahey lecture. So I reached out to him a few months ago, and James very kindly agreed. And James is incredibly busy, always off doing something away, field work, whatever. So, you know, to fit this in on a really packed schedule is very, very much appreciated. So we do appreciate this time. So he's a conservation scientist. He works at the interface of ecology, policy and management, particularly human engagement and interaction with natural areas, which is a really important area for the MPAQ works in as well. And his passion for nature started when he was a boy, out in the bush exploring with his family and on holidays, birds, animals, other wildlife. And from there, the interest and passion has kept growing. On that note, I will stop right now and I'll hand over to James, and yeah, we'll have the talk, and then afterwards we can have some questions and discussion. So thank you. So welcome, James.
Thank you very much. It's great to talk to you this morning, and thanks for coming on a Saturday morning. I want to acknowledge the people of the country, traditional owners of the country, the Turrbal and the Jagera people. They've been here for 30,000 years, managing the land in around Moreton Bay, Toowoomba and the Brisbane area. And they've stewarded these lands, and I hope they continue to steward the remaining bush and coastlands for the next 30,000 years, because they're part of the country and they've played a really important role managing and stewarding this country. So I just want to acknowledge that. Today I'm going to be talking about protected areas. This is something I've been studying for a long time now. I've basically did my PhD in Madagascar now over 20 years ago, and since that time I've moved away from kind of field-based direct conservation action at the site level for the most part, and gone into more wider scale policy at national scales and global scales. So I've got a real passion to understand what happens across countries and what happens, and do protected areas safeguard biodiversity. To put that protected areas in perspective, this is the current global network of marine and terrestrial protected areas globally. So right now, you can see it basically covers about 17% of land and 10% of the marine zones under some kind of formal protection that is recognised by the United Nations Environment Programme, which is the reporting body for all protected areas. So every nation who is a signatory to the Convention on Biological Diversity have to report every year how much land and seas they're protected. Now, we are not entirely sure how much land and sea is currently protected because both India and China about 7 years ago refused to do this anymore. So unfortunately, we don't have a direct actual precise number on the area protected, but it's about 17% of land and 10% in the ocean. So unfortunately, this slide popped up before before the talk started. This was kind of, if you put all those protected areas into one continent, they'll cover the entire surface of South America and Central America. And if you put all those marine protected areas into one area, it's an area the size of China. So it's quite significant. And I think it's something that we should always celebrate and put into context, because a lot of this talk's going to be a little bit negative around protected areas and how we're going, but I think we should always celebrate what's happened in terms of the growth of the protected area network. So, 130 years ago, this is what the protected area network looked like. And over the last 130 years, we've seen this extraordinary growth. So you can see that really the period between 1960, 1980, 2000 and 2026, you see this kind of really huge expansion. It's something that we should always celebrate as conservationists around the world. That 130 years ago there was Yellowstone National Park, but basically that was it. And Royal National Park in Australia for that matter. Now we've got this kind of 17% of land and 10% of the oceans under some form of protection. Australia follows a similar kind of trajectory. You can see there's a database called the CAPAD, which is a collaborative protected area database maintained by the states, which are then given to the federal government, and they have a time of establishment of protected areas, so you can do this kind of time series as well, and you can see the growth over the last 130 years again, and especially recently. You can see the marine protected area states in the last 30 years has really boomed. We're going to go into this a bit more, but going back to the namesake of this lecture, who played a really important role in Queensland during the 1960s, 70s and 80s and 90s, you can see the growth of the protected areas there. That was due to leaders such as himself to try and push the agenda for protected areas, and each state had a kind of champion, to try and push this agenda. But we'll talk about where each state is at the end of this lecture, and potentially what Queensland could potentially do a little bit better given where we are right now. So as of 2026, early 2026, 2 months ago, the latest CAPAD basically is released. About 25% of the Australian continent is under protection, under some formal protection, so we're doing better than the global average. And 52% of Australian waters, half of Australian waters is under formal protection, but that's because of these massive protected areas around in the Indian Ocean and the sub-Antarctics and also the Coral Sea, and also Heard and McDonald Islands, which you can't see right now. These massive protected areas have really ensured that we've got big statistics of marine protected areas. I'm not going to be talking about marine protected areas anymore, sorry. So if anyone is interested in marine protected areas, we can get a marine expert to talk about it. So I'm really a terrestrial guy. So I'm going to be now for the next 30 minutes or so talk about terrestrial protected areas and what and how we're going. And I want to start with just really acknowledging the fact that we have in this state some extraordinary protected areas. I think a lot of you probably know these places, right? But this is obviously Lamington National Park for those who are have been there. An amazing resource. At the top you've got the Daintree. At the bottom you've got it's what's it called? That bloody national park at the west of Budjila, exactly right. Yeah, exactly right. Sorry. Exactly. Lord, my brain just went blank. And Great Barrier Reef National Park. So we should always really realise that these places are extraordinarily spectacular. They're incredibly valuable to the local traditional owners. They preserve a lot of cultural history,
and that we shouldn't, we shouldn't be forgetting the fact that the current estate is very, very precious, because what is happening in Australia, and I don't talk about it in this talk, but it's something we've got to realise. This whole idea about protected area degazettement, which is a global phenomenon, Australia is a world leader. We've had 5,000 types of protected area degazettement happen in the last 20 years. So a lot of our protected areas are it's degazettement or downsizing. They're getting smaller, and they're getting actually open up to different forms of industrial activity. So some of these places, just because they're protected, doesn't mean they're going to be protected forever. So we should always be championing the fact that we've got to at least keep what we've got, regardless of what we've committed to. They are extraordinarily important for conserving biodiversity in Australia. So some protected areas are the only place some species endemic to Australia live, right? So these are some of the species that live only inside the boundaries of a protected area. You've got things like the southern crabberry frog, you've got the northern hairy-nosed wombat, you've got the Capatea skink, you've got the Grampians global pea, you've got the Graveside gorge wattle, which only occurs in Kakadu National Park. So these places are extraordinarily important for some species because they're the only place you can see them in the world. They don't occur in any other landscape or any other tenure. So that's it, there's the last homes. And for some species, they're the last homes when once they were abundant. So some of these other species are naturally rare. They're naturally small, naturally restricted. So the mountain pygmy possum only occurs in Alpine National Park, only occurs in the highest, coldest mountains. So they're trapped there, so they're naturally rare, protected area boundary has been put around them, that's really good news. For species like, anyone know what this species is? The bridle-tailed wallaby was abundant, it was absolutely abundant. Commonest wallaby you saw 150 years ago, then came along foxes, cats and land clearing, and now they're found in Taunton National Park. One spot in the world naturally they occur. They're in some caged areas, some fenced areas, owned by AWC, Australian Wildlife Conservancy, and I think the New South Wales government's got some in caged areas as well, but really they are retracted across their entire range into one spot. And anyone who doesn't know this species, it's well worth Googling it and reading it, because it's a remarkable story of rediscovery. It was completely lost until a dingo shooter and his wife actually saw a photograph in National Geographic magazine or Good Weekend magazine, and joined the dots and realised, hold on, I've got those on my property, so it's a cool story. So enough about the marsupials. I'm a bird watcher. Does everyone know what this bird is? It's night parrot. This is the night parrot. So this is a bird that I work on, and I want to explain not just that protected areas are really important for actually just conserving things. It's important for scientists like myself to go and study them and actually then go and work out how to conserve them. So the night parrot is a remarkable conservation success story. I don't have enough time. It's worth a lecture in its own right to talk about the conservation of the night parrot. But this bird, for those who are non-bird watchers, was ranked the most enigmatic bird in the world. The Smithsonian Institute rated it as the bird that no one understood in the world, the species that we don't understand. It's obviously very rare, we don't know anything about it. And until 15 years ago, you could offer anyone up to $10 million to go see a night parrot, and we knew they were out there somewhere, but no one could actually go and show you one. So you couldn't, even if you paid all the money in the world, you couldn't be shown a night parrot. So, as I say, it's an extraordinary conservation success story. It involves Bush Heritage Australia's leadership, so a big plug to Bush Heritage Australia, but also the fact that, other protected area managers around the boundaries of Bush Heritage Australia's property have ensured that the night parrot could be studied and therefore the knowledge learnt. So a quick potted history. Is there a pointer, do you know? That's a shame. Yeah, that's all about. So the night parrot was lost for about 100 years, and then a dead bird, the top bird, was found in 1990 along a road by weirdly a guy named Walter Bowles, who was actually the curator of the Australian Museum. The reason why it's weird, that story, is that in 1990, Dick Smith had offered a $100,000 reward to anyone who could find any proof of a night parrot. Walter Bowles was the only person who actually had access to specimens of night parrots because he was the curator of the Australian Museum. He randomly found a specimen on a road in 1990. So it's always been tongue-in-cheek, like he just grabbed a specimen, took it out in the middle of nowhere, dropped it off and said, I found it. But he didn't. He actually legitimately found a night parrot. But of all the people who could have found a night parrot and been under suspicion, it was him. So Dick Smith for a while didn't give him the money, but then eventually convinced him, no, actually it is a different specimen to the ones in the museum. But yeah, so 1990, so we thought, okay, excellent, we'll find them now. We know where they are. I think the Queensland government spent $500,000 trying to work out what was going on. The feds put money in. Birdwatchers went and sat, birdwatched around this road area. Could not find a specimen. Couldn't find anything. Couldn't find any evidence of it. And the theory now is that it got hit by a car and was travelled a long distance before it dropped off the car. So people just got the wrong idea about what the habitat was. They were just wandering around going, this is the habitat, but it's not the habitat. So again, found and lost. 2006, a bird was found on a fence in Diamantina National Park by a what was I trying to say? People who dig the roads in. He was on one of those graders, effectively, and he saw a weird thing. A grader driver saw a weird thing on a fence. Went and picked it up. Went to the ranger. The ranger didn't know what it was. Put it in his the drawer of the ranger station. He left. There was a turnover at the ranger station. 3 months later, the next ranger of Diamantina National Park came in, was opening the drawer, and there was a dead night parrot in the drawer. It's like, what's this? There's a dead night parrot in my drawer. And so then starts the process of trying to go, where did the grader driver pick up the bird? And so again, a lot of effort was spent by Birds Queensland and others going around Diamantina National Park to try and find the bird. Nothing. Again, we could not find it until 2013, when John Young did his own homework, found the bird and took the first photograph. And so from there we could actually do science. But it took another 10 years to try and work out exactly where these night parrots were and what they were doing. The point of the story is that inside the protected area of Diamantina National Park and Bush Heritage Trail, my research group, Nick Leesebu in particular, could go out and actually try and work out what was going on with this bird. It took years and years and years. And we tried, to cut a long story short, we worked out the way to detect them was via song meters, these passive recorders. You have to spread them out across massive areas. You've got to listen for these calls at night. And then you have to have some kind of artificial intelligence to go through these calls to try and work out which is a night parrot, because you are trying to find a needle in a haystack, which is an unusual thing to do with a song meter kind of array, a passive array system. But we worked out the technique to do it. And the reason why it's a powerful story is that Nick and ourselves and other people group could then train Indigenous peoples in Western Australia where we thought there were more night parrots. But Western scientists were not allowed to go because they didn't, the Maori people and stuff don't like Western scientists on their land. So we could do some training to go, this is how you discover night parrots more. And we've opened up the populations in Western Australia. We're now seeing more and more populations in Indigenous lands which have been managed. Some of these landscapes have been managed for 80,000 years, the ones in the southern Kimberley and stuff like that. So we're now opening up the door to night parrots, and this is this combination of Western science, Indigenous knowledge, and all because we could do this work on a national park and in a private protected area. And so it's a really important story for conservation. Again, something we should be celebrating. Another story, a recent story that, I think might be interesting. So Estrabla Downs National Park, do people know that? Anyone been there? It's one of the most remarkable bloody national parks, right? It is it's one of the places that, you have to just be out there to believe it. It is flat as a tack and no trees. Literally, the only thing you've got is shrubs this high, right? So you can go out in the middle and just look around and there's literally nothing and nothing. Like you could, and there's nothing on the horizon. It is completely flat. So it's a very cool, moonscape. And there's heaps of bilbies there, which is really, really exciting. But we've also discovered through a hardcore analysis is actually really, really important habitat for this bird, a plains wanderer. Okay, so plains wanderer is an endemic family to Australia, only found in Australia. This not just a species, but a family of bird. It's related to the waders of all things, So it's like the shorebird you see, but it's actually an inland equivalent. And they're an extraordinary bird. And the reason why I say this on Estrabla Downs is that we found them nesting for the first time there. So this bird was only really known from northern Victoria. There was rumours that they occurred in Queensland, but now we've found significant populations. In the space of 3 months, we've doubled the world's population of plains wanderer because of our research on Estrabla Downs. So again, a great national park, well managed because of the bilby populations. People go out there and shoot cats and remove foxes. Or keep the cattle off the property, which is keeping this habitat intact for other species that we knew nothing about, such as the plains wanderer. So I hope I'm making the case that Australia's protected areas are really important for conserving birds, and it's actually a global responsibility. And it's something that when you talk to ministers, you talk to Queensland local council members, you talk to premiers, you talk to national leaders, that it's not just Australia for Australia, it's Australia for the world, because we are one of 17 mega biodiverse countries. We own basically, among 17 countries, 70% of Earth's species. So we celebrated David Attenborough's birthday yesterday. He's 100 years old. I'm sure you probably saw that in the news. He makes the point that, these nations, it's not even. Unfortunately, it's not even. These nations have a much greater responsibility when it comes to biodiversity conservation. So, and Australia is ranked 7th, one of these most important nations globally, right? So our protected area network has to work for our natural heritage at a global scale. Right, so, and the other thing is just some statistics to always remember. 85% of our plant, mammals, and reptiles and amphibian species are found nowhere else. Like, it is highly speciose and it's highly important, in terms of at a global scale. We have to remember that we are absolutely terrible at managing these species since European settlement. We are world champions of losing mammals since 1750. But we've lost lots of species. And a key point to make, and again, it's something you probably all know, but I always have to keep on reminding people, it's not just one area that's lost these species. It wasn't just one area that was poorly managed. It was across the continent. Now, if people want, just to be clear, I see people taking photos, the slides, they're yours. So email me and I'll give you the PowerPoint. You've got a copy of the PowerPoint, share it with members. I'm not one of these people who try and protect my slides. Use them. One of the great honours is going to talks and seeing my slides, someone else giving a better presentation. It's brilliant. I can actually take them, and it's a great thing to do. So, yeah, I'm very happy for you to use your slides and utilise them however you want. So, yeah, we are. But the key point here is they're everywhere. The extinctions have occurred across most of the continent of Australia. And another thing is, it's actually ongoing. It's not a crisis that happened 150 years ago and now we're fine. These are the cumulative number of extinctions that have happened over the last 200 years. I take this photograph. This is me and my twin brother on the banks of the Murrumbidgee. I grew up in Hay in western New South Wales. So I just take this photo because I'm not that old. Even though I show this photo, I feel like I'm getting old now. But it's only 35 years ago that photo was taken, right? And since that time, we've lost 20 species. So since the time I was sitting on the banks of the Murrumbidgee, we've also lost another 20 more species. So it's an ongoing crisis that it's not plateauing. It's actually just going up and up and up. The problem is not going away. So it's sad and sorry state of affairs that this crisis needs investment and needs attention, and it's not a historic thing that is playing out. For those who don't know federal politics or federal legislation lingo, the EPBC Act is basically our Protected Species Act, Endangered Species Act. It's basically been going since 2000, since Senator Robert Hill, who was part of the Howard government, helped set it up. It documents how many species are actually endangered in Australia. And the key thing is, obviously, it's going up now to 2,138 species listed. And just to give, because there's these terms like critically endangered, endangered, vulnerable. They sound dramatic terms, but they actually mean something mathematical that a lot of people don't fully understand. So if you are listed as critically endangered, if that's what the formal listing is, it is saying that you have 50% chance of going extinct in the next 10 years if we don't do something about it. So if you're here, the critically endangered so-and-so over here, what it is a scientist saying, we give it a 50% chance of going extinct in 10 years. If you're endangered, you are 50% in 20 years. If you're vulnerable, you've got 50% in 30 years. So it's a time to extinction. It's a risk of extinction measure. So if you're critically endangered, you're in serious trouble. You're in big trouble. You've got a 50% chance of disappearing off the planet in 10 years. So when these red numbers are going up, this is something to be very alarmed about. So why am I saying this? Well, our protected area state has to be at the forefront of stopping this extinction crisis. And my science and a lot of other people's science, Mark Hockings, you've probably met or know of, he's done a lot of science in this as well, Hugh Possingham as well, loads of people have. So it's not just me, but it's a lot of people making this clear point that for protected areas to work in Australia, and anywhere, but really importantly in Australia, they've got to be well placed, they've got to be large enough to actually manage the populations in them, and they've got to be well funded and well resourced. So the next 10 minutes or so, I'm going to be talking about how well placed they are, because that's actually the first part of the agreement for this network to work, for this protected area network to work. Because if you're not well placed and you're not large enough and you're not well funded, then you're wasting your time when it comes to management in Australia. And I'll explain a bit more why you need to have all three things. So I've been asking this whole question about how well placed our national reserve system is going when it comes to threatened species for about 15 years or so. So this is a photo of me in Taunton National Park. We have a bridled nail-tailed wallaby in that cage. We're about to we caught it overnight, we've taken some blood and we're about to release it. But this photo was taken about 15 years ago. And this paper was published about 15 years ago, basically asking the question, what is the capacity of Australia's protected areas at actually representing threatened species? And this is the only kind of graph that is I think might be complicated to understand, and that's why I wanted to point out, but I'll try to explain it. But basically in 2010, we discovered, my co-authors and I, that we weren't doing very well. Effectively, where we were was basically these squares, and these squares are basically saying that we're only capturing an average proportion of threatened species about 40% of the time, and there were loads of gap species that actually weren't inside the protected area network. And what we also asked is, if you randomly place protected areas, if you had about 6 beers and you got the entire protected area network and just threw them as dice around the country, our protected area network was doing just as well as that. Well, just barely better than randomly placing the protected area network across the estate. But if you use the same amount of land and optimise the for threatened species coverage, you could get these results. So you could actually have no gap species. You could have 100% protection. So if you planned it well, you could have actually had a great outcome. If you did nothing randomly, it's basically how we're tracking. We're just a bit better than a null model, which is actually very, very scary. The federal government at the time took this very seriously. This is very embarrassing to them, this paper, because it was actually saying, we've got to do better. And at the time, this guy was the Minister for the Environment, the Midnight Oil front man. So Peter Garrett basically generated, but not just on the back of this science, but other science, we need a new National Reserve System strategy. And he made it clear, if you read this document, which is still online, it was a 20-year plan, he made it clear that we need to prioritise biodiversity conservation. Now, he also wanted the states to get involved, because the states are the most important actor in protected area designation and management. So the feds could give some money, but part of the plan was he wanted to plan with every state. Let's get this moving together. We'll co-fund, but he said, I'll co-fund with states a better representative network to get outcomes for biodiversity. In 2010, there was also the Convention on Biological Diversity met. They came up with the ARCHE targets, which are these global targets between 2010 and 2020, and their big target was target 11, which was basically saying every nation who signed the CBD needs to get their protected area network to 17%, and they've got to target areas of importance for biodiversity. So Australia signed on to that as well. So it's actually a commitment in 2010 to say, look, and it was celebrated. This was a big moment, and I was actually there in Nagoya, and Mark Hawkins was there, other people there. This is the first time the world had come together and put this ambitious agenda of expanding protected areas and also targeting biodiversity. So we've done some science on how well we went since then. And the growth of the protected area network was enormous since 2010. And we stopped at 2022 because that's when the strategic plan basically ended from the ARCHE targets. It was meant to be 2010 to 2020. But obviously COVID happened, so it was expanded out to 2022. Australia increased their protected area network by basically 730,000 square kilometres, which is enormous. Basically, it went from 12% or 13% of Australia to 22% of Australia. And this is where the areas you see the growth, in 2-year blocks. So aerially, it was an incredible achievement. But as I said, I'm passionate about, is it doing better at representing threatened species, given that the fact in 2010, basically a null model, a random pattern of protected areas, was doing just as well as the current protected area state was at the time. So we have to do better, right? So I asked that question about 3 years ago, because the federal government is now trying to embrace a 30 by 30 agenda, which I'll talk about at the end of the talk. So how are they doing? How did this work? Some species did very well in the last 12 years. So the western partridge pigeon increased their levels of protection by 50%. This Hibertia circinata. Does any plant experts here? I don't even know. I looked up my spreadsheet and found that hasn't even got a common name. So unfortunately, but that increased by 70%. So some species did very, very well in terms of what happened with that expansion between 2010 and 2022. But on average, there was just a 1.9% increase in threatened species coverage, despite the fact there was almost a doubling in the protected area states. So this is the growth of the protected areas over that period, and this is the average amount of protection occurring for, what is this? This is critically endangered and vulnerable species. So if it was well placed, obviously these lines should be tracking that line. If they were targeting it, they should be, but it's actually a flat line. You're getting literally a minimal increase in protection, despite an almost doubling the estate. And there was no real difference across taxonomic groups we found. Like you could see who did better. I think mammals did slightly better than everyone else. So even though some species, those 2,000 species I mentioned, did well, most species got bugger all in changes in terms of their coverage. And 160 species, with a doubling of the protected area network, 160 of the most endangered species in a country are gap species. They are not in any protected area. And this includes critically endangered species, the condamine eeless dragon, the thick-billed grass wren out in western New South Wales, the subspecies there, which is called the grey range thick-billed grass wren, which is only 50 individuals left. As I said, critically endangered. If nothing happens to them, if we don't do anything, there's a 50% chance these species will go extinct in the next 10 years. Completely absent from the protected area network. 40 critically endangered species are completely absent from our protected area network. So I could probably hear you thinking, how can that be happening? There's almost a doubling of the protected area state in 12 years. Okay, and yet we've had a flatlining in terms of how many species are actually captured in protected areas. And there was this commitment in 2009 to do better by Peter Garrett. We have to do better. And so what happened? Well, it's obvious what's happened when you start looking at maps. So I feel like an optometrist who's got glasses. You know how you go back and forth. Which one's clearer? Which one's clearer? Which one's clearer? This is what happened, right? And you can start to see potentially what the problem is. All right. So that's the doubling of the protected area network, and you can see if you look at a map of Australia. Now, this is a colour scheme that you need to work through, is that if you're basically really well protected in 2010 and you increase your protection, you go from orange to brown, right? If you're really poorly protected and you want to actually increase your protection, you go to blues. So what you want is lots and lots of blues, all right? And the size of the arrow is how much more in each bioregion in Australia you're increasing in that 12-year period. So what we can see is lots of really well-protected bioregions in Australia in 2010 got a lot more protection. So we protected areas that were already very, very well protected. And areas that were poorly protected got very little protection. So while we doubled the protected area state, we were primarily focusing on areas that are in regions that are very, very well protected. Now, I want to stress something. A lot of that's to do with the Indigenous protected areas in Central Australia and Western Australia. That's a great outcome. It's not a binary. I'm not saying we should not be protecting these areas and we should be protecting these areas. I'm saying that's great. The Indigenous protected area state's incredible. It's something we should be celebrated, and we are celebrated around the world for what we've done for Indigenous peoples in Western Australia and South Australia and Northern Territory. But we just neglected this, and that's the problem. That's the key issue, is that it's not an either or. We should be doing both, all right, in terms of targeting these protected areas. And a simple map of Australian threatened species. These are where the threatened species of Australia live, right? Like if you put all the range maps on top of each other. So that's the heat map of where threatened species occur. And we targeted all the light areas where there's not many threatened species. And we didn't target, for the most part, areas that there's lots of threatened species. So of course, threatened species therefore didn't go up. We weren't targeting the right areas. There are some exceptions. You can see lots of threatened species up in the Kimberley, up in the top end, and there's some big growths there. So that's why you're getting some wins, You can see some kind of nice winds there. But basically, wherever you get this really dark green spot, you get very little protected area growth. So again, that's the challenge that we actually are facing right now. The other challenges are simply, this is complicated stuff, and politicians don't like complicated stuff, is what I've learned, okay? So this guy was the Environment Minister in 2014. In 2014, there was the World's Parks Congress, which is 10,000, it's the biggest conservation congress in the world, right? It's the Sydney Parks Congress. 10,000 people turn up, and our minister at the time basically said, we have reached the Arche target. We're the first nation to do it. And he was right. We got to 17%. We were the first nation to get to 17%. He was giving the keynote address. He said, yeah, we actually got 17%. We just didn't do it in areas particularly, that are ecologically representative or important for biodiversity. We just got area. We just chased area and then celebrated it as a win. And that is a serious problem because this target's quite complicated. You need 17% in areas of particular importance. But, it's incredibly hard to explain that even now to politicians, that actually the second part, the qualitative statement, is more important than the aerial statement. I would much rather a smaller protected area network that was targeted than a big protected area network that is not targeted. And I'll explain why in a second, because I think there's a problem on the horizon because of this. So all this science is publicly available. Here's the paper. If you really want to dig it out, there's a paper, and that's the conversation article, a 1,000-word summary of the research that we published on this stuff. I think it's online. I think it's on your website. But again, you can have this slide and look this up. But if you're interested in diving in, this has got every species and every coverage increase and decrease. You'll be able to dive into that if you're interested. But there are 4 worries associated with all this, right, in my mind. I think globally we're seeing a plateauing in the growth in protected areas. So nations in 2023 said they recommitted to not just 17% but 30% of protected areas globally. But if you look at the numbers, there's not much growth happening. So all these nations said by 2030, 30% of the planet will be protected. It's not happening. In Australia, you can see it. You can see that there's this kind of growth. This is the terrestrial area network. It's not booming. It's slowing down. Now, marine's doing very well, but that's because 1 or 2 national parks in the subantarctic oceans and in the coral sea has been declared. So you see these massive jump up areas, but then flat lines. So it's not yet. So worry number 1 is you start to see this kind of plateauing occurring. And I think it's related to this second worry, which is this concept of protected area fatigue. Now, the person who came up with that was Tony Abbott. He said it's protected area fatigue. There's too many protected areas. And I think there's actually evidence for that in society, and you can look at it when you look at the numbers. So look at the ACT and Tasmania. Tasmania is one I'm always interested in because Tasmania is celebrated as a very natural area, like a wilderness area. People celebrate Tasmania, and 41% of the state is protected. But that growth happened in the 70s, 80s and 90s. Since the 2000s, 2010, 2020, there's been zero or very little protected area establishment. They got to about 40%, and I've been and talked to Tasmanian governments, both Liberal and Labor, and they keep on saying the same thing. How much land do you need? Come on, we need to have land for other activities. So, you get to this stage of, you get to about 40%, and that's when general society on both sides of politics saying that's enough. That's all you greenies can get because we need to actually log forests, we need to do agricultural activity, we need mining, we need places to live, so that's enough. So this idea that, we can just keep on setting targets and it'll be fine, I don't think that's the truth. I think we hit this kind of syndrome that actually we're running out, you hit to about 30%, that 30 or 40%, and then that is it. As I say, Tasmania is a classic example because it is the greenest state. It was once, co-governed by the Greens, and yet you can't actually get any kind of protected area establishment now, even with national commitments to try and increase protected areas in important biodiversity areas. The reason why it is a really big worry, because you might be going, 41%, that is a lot of land. The state with the biggest biodiversity crisis in Australia is Tasmania. 41% of the land, and it's got more threatened species, more declining species. Why is that? Because we went and chose the wrong bits of land. So where all the threatened species are in Tasmania, in the northeast of the state, and where our protected areas are in the southwest of the state. So you actually got the protected areas, and you've run out of rooms on the chess game. We can't convince the premiers and the government to say, look, let's get some more protected areas in the northeast. They say, no, you've got 41%. but the 41% is in the wrong spot. So it's a real problem. It means that where you place your protected areas now matter, because you run out of room going forward. As you play a chess game, there's less and less manoeuvrability to get your final outcome. So that's why I get passionate about it. We've got to get it right now, because in 10 years' time, it's going to be Tasmania. And so you've got your 35%. That's enough, Tasmania, biggest biodiversity crisis, right? The third one is this is a worry, but it's probably a lesser worry. Is that do you know about the IUCN categories for protected areas? So there's 6 categories a protected area can be given, right? IUCN 1 is strict protection. It's basically like Taunton National Park. Only scientists can go. It's like a Strebler, right? It's everyone else. Everyone else. This is for the species. All the way up to basically IUCN 1 to 4 categories are very well managed protected areas, and it's really for the outcomes for biodiversity. You can't put tourist development in there. You can't put mines in there. You can't put forestry in there. Cattle, keep them out. 5 and 6, far more loose. Mining can occur, infrastructure can occur. It can be tourism activities as well. You can see the proportions of Australian protected areas are changing from stricter to less stricter over time. You see this kind of shift from really hardcore management to less hardcore management. And you can see there's a trend. The greens are the IUCN categories 5 and 6. They are they're dominating. Now, those who know the numbers know there's actually an inside trick to this, and that is a lot of that area is the Indigenous protected areas, right? So Indigenous protected areas, they don't want strict protection. They want to be able to have decision-making over their land. So they ask for 5 and 6, right? But still, this trend is worrying. The proportion of the protected area state that is managed for biodiversity strictly is declining as it grows. But the fourth worry is that the threatening processes that are causing our extinction crisis is getting worse. That is every bit of evidence is showing that. Every single thing that is causing problems to our species, not one threatening process is being ameliorated. Every single one we study is just getting more and more. And it's complicated. This graph just shows these are all the threatening processes that all the threatened species face. So if you go to 2,300 species, you go and work out what's threatening them. These are the numbers of species that are affected by each threat. It's really a mess, right? And Australia is very unusual that if you did this in somewhere like Canada, this graph would be very simple. It'd be like 4 or 5 threats. Australia, unfortunately, because of our isolation, because of our issues with fire and invasives and disease and land clearing, we have loads of problems, right? So it's a very hard thing to actually overcome. And the other thing to keep in mind is, unlike other places, where often when the best way to do conservation is just to tell people to stop doing bad things, unfortunately for Australia, we need active management as well. You've got to still manage pests. You've got to still manage fire. You can't just leave nature alone and it'll rebound. And now needs people on the land doing things, replanting, like getting rid of diseases. So it needs active management, unlike many other places of the planet, which is often around stopping chainsaws. So that's again an Australian-centric problem. But if you break all these threats down and you really think through what are the major challenges, these are the 4 devils that actually are causing our crisis. Habitat loss, invasive species, fire and climate change, right? These are the things that are going to cause us most of our grief. And the thing to always remember is that habitat loss, fragmentation and degradation is number 1. So you'll hear in the budget next week or 2 weeks' time, when Chalmers gets up and talks about the federal government, he's going to give a lot of money to cat management. That's what he's going to do. And he's going to say this is the most important thing we've got to do in Australia is manage cats. Managing cats is really important, but it's secondary to managing habitat loss. That is by far the biggest problem, and Australia has a really big problem with habitat loss. So deforestation and degradation of habitat is the biggest issue facing most species in Australia. Cat management is important for many mammals and some birds. It's not for the 1,600 species of plants that are actually on the Endangered Species Act. Right? So we've got to get ahead, we've got to be real when we're talking to politicians that this is the biggest issue. And the reason why I'm saying this is that Australia still, to this day, despite being a mega biodiverse country, is a deforestation hotspot. We are literally the baddest countries of the world in terms of clearing our land. And this state is number one when it comes to deforestation. This is basically the quote from the Queensland government latest report. between 2021 and 22, 323,000 hectares of woody vegetation was bulldozed. A very slight reduction from 349,000. That was seen as a victory. There's been a bit of a reduction of the land clearing. But if you put it in perspective, that's 10 times the amount of land clearing that occurs in Indonesia for oil palm, which gets global attention. So our land clearing is absolutely out of control, and it's for pasture. It's for beef farming. So beef farming or associated land clearing makes us a global headline. I think Queensland would be ranked as a state. If the state of Queensland was a country, it'd be ranked number 3 in the world when it comes to deforestation. One state of Australia. So it is a major problem. And again, when you look at protected areas versus where we are protecting land, so the top graph is basically an analysis of 2017 of the areas of land protected. As I said, it's the desert regions of central and western Australia. Where we clear land is the middle graph. So that's basically all these areas. So the ratio of where we clear our forests and where we protect our forests are in exactly the wrong areas. So, so there's a big mismatch. Where you'd want is your protection in these areas there, but that's where the clearing is occurring and there's no protection occurring. Again, a major issue. And remembering that most threatened species are threatened by deforestation, front and centre. So that's the issue we've got to address. Just again, to put this in perspective, since 2000, since the EPBC Act was promoted as a way to safeguard species. So these species are endangered species that shouldn't have a single hectare cleared based on the EPBC Act. And some of these species have lost 3 million hectares of their range because of deforestation. They should have not lost any based on the law. So that's the size of the challenge. And all these species, with the exception of squatter pigeon, malleefowl, and bluegrass actually occur in Queensland. They're predominantly in Queensland. So getting to the last bits of the talk. So I think we've got to realise we've got to have some hope, and I think one hope was to change the government. The previous Liberal government had no interest at all in solving this issue. And when Albanese won his first election, Tanya Plibersek came in and made some really big commitments. Global commitments, like we became a leader in the High Ambition Coalition. We're going to get 30 by 30 sorted out, and we're going to conserve biodiversity. They came out with this roadmap, which came out last year. It's been 2 years in the making, saying we've got to achieve 30% of the land. And if you look at so this is the key figure in it, there's 2 components. One is around effectively managed, and obviously supporting Indigenous nations, which is great, but effectively managed, so that means well-resourced, and in the right areas. Again, they're doing what Peter Garrett said 15 years before. We have to get this better because this is a real problem. So that's our current roadmap, all right? So the other good pieces of news is that we know exactly where we need to go. This is a piece of science I did for the International Union for Nature Conservation, basically saying this is basically, if you look at the 30 by 30 target, we need to map and protect these areas. And in Australia, we have data for all of this. So we know exactly where to actually target protection. There's a piece of science we published this year, or maybe it was late last year, basically said there's a really low-hanging fruit, that there's 305 range-restricted critically endangered species. So those species that are going to go extinct in the next 10 years, if we don't do anything about it, we know exactly where they are. We know exactly that if you go and conserve them, it's 85,000 square kilometres of habitat, of which half of it's on agricultural land, which therefore is open up for land clearing. So it's a real risk, right? But it's only if you actually target these landscapes, it's only 1% of Australia. You get this massive benefit for threatened species with just targeted protection for these landscapes. So there's real opportunities to get unbelievable outcomes for threatened species. And the excuse in the past is we just don't know where these areas are. We know exactly where they are. And it's on the public domain. For the first time you actually can go, look, this is where these habitats are, let's go and protect them. So again, there's actually, in front of the government right now are these types of maps. In fact, I've done this analysis for the federal government. They've asked me to say, where would you go, James? Because I whinge them it so much. And I've produced the map. This is the map to safeguard threatened species based on what we know in terms of where we have to go to target the best outcome. If you want 30% to actually solve your riddle in terms of your threatened species crisis, they have the map. It's there. You can see Tasmania just pop out. So again, this is the great irony of Tasmania. 40% protected, but most of the northeast is where you have to actually go to get your outcomes. But so they have the solution in front of them. They cannot make the excuse that we don't know what to do yet. So that's good news. And the other bit of good news you've got to realise is that there has been some great properties bought in Queensland, which should be celebrated. These are fantastic stations that have been bought in the last year or two. Bergamot Station is critical to things like night parrot habitat and open grasslands. So you're getting these kind of purchases of land that actually are making a difference, right? And there's also, just a couple of weeks ago, the third Special Wildlife Reserve was actually awarded. That's very critical because that stops mining, right? So when you're nominated as a Special Wildlife Reserve, you cannot mine that area anymore. It's one of those few designations that actually stop mining. So you're starting to see some consideration, but it's the third one. What we need to see is the 300th one, if celebrated, not the third one. So I'll leave you. There's one last slide. It's again, I think, just to think about it. This is the slide of the states, as I said, and I'll worry about the Tasmanian syndrome and the ACT syndrome. But have a look at Queensland in this slide. Was it 8%? 8% of Queensland, 9% of Queensland is actually protected. It's the most biodiverse state, and yet we're at 9%. There is massive amounts of opportunity for conservation. Queensland should be setting a target of 30%. And if you look at this map here, the one on map, a lot of Queensland needs to be targeting for protection if we're going to get outcomes for threatened species. So I'll be hassling the government, how we last? How's the state of Queensland basically last, given the fact we've got more species and we've basically got more land except for Western Australia? Why can't we do more? So I think that's the pressure that we have to keep on putting on the Queensland state government and local councils and the federal government, is that we can't just be chasing area again. We've got to be chasing biodiverse areas, and states like Queensland and Tasmania need to step up, because that's where and Western Australia, that's where the priorities are. So that's it. So yeah, thanks for listening. As I say, I work on this is my research group, RARES, the Research and Recovery of Endangered Species. That's my email address in terms of if you want to get a copy of the slides or any of these papers. But they're also, happy to chat about any of this, and I'll make this publicly available if you're interested. But thanks very much for listening. Happy to take questions.
A lot to think about.
Yeah, probably way too much. And sorry, we went over time.
That's okay. All right, we're opening up to questions now.
Yeah.
Just how much of that protected area is government protection?
Oh, excellent.
And how much is private?
Yeah, that's an
Like
excellent.
an Australian Wildlife Conservancy.
Yeah.
And the other point is,
Yeah.
should the private Australian Wildlife Conservancy, should we be using them and donating them more money to them to buy up more land?
Look, that's.
Should we privatise it rather than rely on governments to do it?
I have a slide which actually pulls this out, and it's in this paper. We pull that out in this paper, right? But to cut a long story short, this is probably the best slide. What happened with the protected areas is that in 2010, Garrick got in, right, and said, right, we've got to do better. And for about that growth there was mostly government protected areas, right? So, and then you had that World Parks Congress where Greg Hunt got up and said, we've done it. And not a single dollar since then was spent until the Labor government got in on government protected areas. So all the heavy lifting from about 2014 to 2022 was the private protected area network. That I think there was 10,000 reserves established. All right, so it's not just AWC. There's a group called ALCA, the Australian Land Conservation Alliance. So that's all the groups. There's there's groups in Tasmania, in Queensland, Bush Heritage Australia and AWC are the big boys. But there's other groups in there doing an unbelievable amount of heavy lifting, because the Australian government for about 10 years said, no, we've got 17%. We've done what we said we were going to do. So that's been the issue. Right now, you're starting to see state governments do these co-funding arrangements. So I spoke about this success, Bergamot Station. If you read underneath the lines, Bergamot, that's co-funded. That's the Nature Conservancy, which is an American NGO, and the Queensland government co-funding this together. So there's arrangements now that it's not just the government, but it's actually a co-funded arrangement. So to answer your question, a lot of land is Crown-held land. That is leasehold land and stuff like that. That's in the government's they can make choices around that land. So we should be putting pressure on them around actually ensuring that some of this leasehold land goes back to protected areas. It doesn't just be given to farmers or miners. So I think we should be always pressuring that. But the bottom line is the way politics is going, it's going to be these private land conservation efforts that are going to probably save the day. If we're going to achieve this map, in a realism, is that most of this heavy lifting is probably going to be the NGOs. I think there'll be some strategic purchases done, but what we want the governments then to do is do tax incentives and stuff like that. So when you donate money to to an AWC, there is a reward system there. So because they're not doing the heavy lifting anymore, but at least they're not punishing you. They should be giving some incentive for people to do the right thing. So that's the hope, is that transition into that. But yes, I hope that answers your question. Any other?
Question though.
Yeah.
Have you done a comparison of hectares and not percentages of stakes? Because when you say 50% almost of ACT, it's not a very big.
Oh, 100%, yeah. That's why, look, when I did this graph, I went, oh no, that's just going to be annoying. Because ACT, you're right, and they did it, when did they do it? In 1980s. They got to 7, yeah. So there's not much room for ACT to do anything, right? So like they've done, their game is done. This is the Tasmania problem I want to show, is that there's still a heap of land, in Tasmania. And I just think we just don't talk about this enough. This syndrome of you get to about 40%. Tony Abbott said it in publicly, protected area fatigue. It's real. And go and talk to them. Go and talk to both sides of Parliament or governments down there, and they're just looking at you as if you're mad. Going, you want another protected area? What are you talking about? It's 41%, man. How much do you need? And it's it's shocking. That'd be great.
Yeah, but I'm just saying compared to me, it's kind of also about hectares, not just percentages.
Oh yeah. You're absolutely right. You're right. Yeah. Yep. Sorry.
I was really pleased to see that governments were buying up big pastoral properties, but then I saw on some Facebook sites that the people living out there feel that their neighbours are shrinking, and then their access to schools for their kids and their family inheritances are going to be affected. Speaking as someone who's really pleased to see the government buying up these lands, but I wonder how that's going to be managed for those people.
Yeah, look, so there was an ABC story on that. I was interviewed on that, and I was kind of going, you've got to be kidding me, that's your angle? There was a big ABC expose, those 15-minute exposés in New South Wales around this very issue, is that New South Wales government has purchased a number of big properties northwest of New South Wales, and the local farmers are furious with it because they're losing their neighbours. I don't know how to say this politely. Bad luck. You don't have a right to that style of life. If you manage that land for conservation, fantastic. Great, live out there, that's wonderful. Most people don't. That country out there, if you've been in northwest New South Wales, it is flogged to an inch of its life. It shouldn't be farmed in the way it's been farming, and their way of life is going to be affected. Bad luck. You get fuel incentives, you get all this kind of incentives to actually maintain your lifestyle, and just because the government decides to go, actually, we've got a biodiversity crisis, and those properties are important, so I suppose it sounds really cruel, but it's I have no sympathy. And then when you start realising who owns those properties, and it's big corporations, like the McDonald's, who own 19 bloody properties in Queensland, and they get annoyed because one property is turned into a protected area. You own 19 pastoral companies, one family. Mate, give us a break. So I'm sorry. I suppose it's it's sad that some certain lifestyles are changing, but in the big scheme of things, I'm assuming there will be systems to be set up to ensure that people can still be connected to those places. You don't want towns to go extinct and stuff like that. And I grew up in Hay, right, which is a town which has shrunk massively to when I was a kid. So it is sad to see these kind of things die out as well. But my biggest reaction is I was really annoyed with that article. Because that should have been a success story. That should have been, we should be celebrating this. And instead it was written as the Greenies are taking over. And it was ABC. It wasn't even Fox. It wasn't even Murdoch. It was I just couldn't believe what I was reading. So yeah. So
I think you probably already answered this, but that's a very big and powerful lobby, the beef lobby, and the bits on your map are very expensive.
Yep.
Queensland. Do you feel there's any way for the two to coexist? Is there any way to have biodiversity in some form of beef farming, or are they just two mutually
Excellent question. I know I'm friends with beef farmers who do the right thing, and they get so annoyed that beef farmers are seen as one bucket of people. That there's actually a spectrum of beef farmers. Some of them do it well, and some of them do it really badly. And what they're lobbying for, and it's good because the European Union has changed the game. The European Union are actually excellent. They've come and said, deforestation-free beef. We're not buying your beef unless you can prove it's deforestation-free. And Queensland government and most of the farmers have basically shut themselves over that. But the good farmers are going, brilliant. That's exactly what we want. We want lower stock densities and good beef. We should be paying the right price for beef. It shouldn't be, a steak should cost you $50 because that's the environmental cost of this. I'd say we should be rewarding good farmers, and actually, in these international policies and stuff should actually be helping us get to that stage. McDonald's is actually coming on board apparently with its deforestation-free pledges and stuff like that. So there is things happening around the world around this space. Getting down to the crux of will we be able to actually, will it happen? You're right. The beef farming lobby has been unbelievably powerful in this state for decades. And it's money, and it's one political party. It's basically and you see what happens as soon as one. The problem is policy ping pong. You have Peter Beattie come in and basically ban land clearing, and then then 5 years later he gets booted out. Then suddenly land clearing spikes again. So it's until there's some middle ground. I think that's the problem, and I think the middle ground has to be economics. But. If we're going to meet, I suppose the other thing you say, if we're going to meet the Australian commitment of no more extinctions by 2031, because that's the commitment, we'll have no more extinctions. The only way that can happen is by some of those properties to be protected. Otherwise, you're locking in extinction. The Condamine eeless dragon lives on 3 beef farming properties. Either those people need to be rewarded for doing conservation on those areas, or some kind of protected area management has to occur. Otherwise, that species is gone. It can't be managed. So, yeah.
There's about 50,000 hectares in southeast Queensland that was state forest, or is still state forest, where the government's announced that there won't be native timber logging in the future. Is that on your hit list of places that you want to see protected because it does have biodiversity value? I'm not kind of forgetting about individual forests, but in southeast Queensland, is that of high value? Is that sort of
there's definitely places in southeast Queensland that are valuable. If you look at that map, this is an optimum map, of course, but yeah, there are enough state forests which hold big populations of endangered species, powerful owls, masked owls. I'm a bird watcher, so I always think in terms of owls. There's properties of eastern bristlebird, that kind of thing. Yeah, I think another bit of optimistic news I can see on the horizon is the Victorians have now basically said no more logging. The Queenslanders seem to be realising it's just such a stupid industry when you look at the economics of logging. It's this doesn't make any sense, right? And I think the last 2 basket cases are Tasmania and New South Wales. And they're going through this regional forestry agreement process right now with the federal government to try and change the way big-scale forestry works. So that's in the next year, actually. So that's going to be a really good indication of the Labor government in federally if they actually force those 2 states to get their act together, because the RFAs are ending. It's meant to be the Victorians have got their act together. So can we actually end this kind of ridiculousness of that we need a native forest sector? It should be. The Victorians have transitioned to plantations. Effectively, New South Wales has heaps of plantations. I'm about to drive to Hervey Bay. I'm about to drive through a ton of plantations. There is a good plantation sector out there, and the economics don't make sense. So, so that's two-pronged answer. The first one is, there is definitely protected areas. Some of those state forests are very valuable. Others, unfortunately, have been logged to the wazoo. So they need a lot of kind of restoration and rehabilitation. I live in Byron Shire, right? There isn't, in the entire Shire, there's 1% that hasn't been logged. It looks pretty green because of the camphor laurels. 1%. 1%. One valley has been, the rest has been Absolutely, all the old trees have been knocked down. So it's going to be hundreds of years to get back to any kind of normality. So I would say always go to those places that haven't been knocked down yet. They are still the most important places because this restoration will take years and years. Yeah.
Are there examples of good mixed hardwood plantations? Because there's been huge problems just with monocultural ones, and some of the native hardwood timber is construction timber. It's not all going to chips. So where do we get the timber from? Because there's this gap without us going overseas.
Well, what I want to understand is there is now coming online is not a bad hardwood plantation sector in Victoria. There's actually not too bad, and it's actually there's a PhD being done on there on the value, what the biodiversity benefits of these plantations are. If they're done in places that were cleared originally, and you're growing forests on those areas, that's a great benefit. If you're logging forest to put a plantation in, that's insane. That's absolutely insane. So that's the problem. So what I understand is that that was once a legitimate argument 15 or 20 years ago, but investment has gone into hard growth industry, hard growth timber products. And there are just other products out there to build houses. You don't need, it's not essential to actually have hard growth, it's a choice people make, right? My house doesn't have a hard growth timber in it. It's made of this stuff, which is, all sorts of problems with that. but it's at least, it's a choice, I think, that we need to realise. Yeah.
We might need to bring it to an end there because we've got morning tea ready, tea and coffee and a lovely bite to eat as well. So it's a bit after 10 and wow, there's a lot to think about, a lot of challenges, also some optimism, and so it's really tweaked a lot of thinking. So thank you very much, James, very much. It's a really relevant issue. It's got to keep on going. So James will be hanging around for a little while. So if you've got another question or would like to have a quick chat, please do. Just to let you know too, the toilets are just out here on the left, and we look forward to fixing and saying our hi. So thank you again, and thanks all for coming. It's really lovely to see you all. Thank you. Okay.